Hello and welcome to the Blacksmith and You. This is part of an ongoing series of deep dives into various aspects of the board game Kingdom Death Monster. And my name is Fen. This time we're looking at the very top of our crafting chain for the core generic locations. Before I dive into this, I'm just going to briefly talk about some spoilers to do with the core game campaign, People of the Lantern only. So if you don't want to hear those, I'm going to give a break for you to skip ahead. I will mark this section spoilers, so you know exactly how much to skip past. If you've not played through People of the Lantern and got to the moment I'm going to talk about, where there is some stuff going on that's interesting, then I recommend you don't listen to this section at all. If you've just unlocked the Blacksmith, that's enough. Okay, last chance. Right, so in the end game section of People of the Lantern, after you've defeated the first Nemesis monster, the core Nemesis monster, you will gain access to the ability to upgrade certain gear cards from the Blacksmith. I'm going to rattle the list off. I'm not going to talk about what any of them do, but the big thing to note is each one of these upgradable gear cards has a little bit more value in People of the Lantern because of the potential. You can scale it a little bit further up and make it a bit stronger. They are the Lantern Sword, the Beacon Shield, the Lantern Dagger, the Lantern Glaive, the Ring Whip, and the Lantern Helm. And for those of you who are listening here, I'm not going to talk about anything to do with the Gambler's Chest, alright? And please don't put it in the comments. That is for far in the future. Many people have not explored that content yet fully, so shh. Okay, just steady yourself. Think of other people. You only get to experience stuff in Kingdom Death blind once. People who want to find spoilers can go looking for them, but we're not doing that here to them. All right, this is just between us who've already seen all this, or those of us who don't care about spoilers in general. Okay, we're going to let everyone else back in now. Okay, that's the end of the spoiler section. Now, let's get to the main thesis of the Blacksmith, along with your unlock route. So, the Blacksmith is unlocked via a slightly unusual chain. We go from Bonesmith to Weapon Crafter, which you can see here on the left side, and then with this innovation, or normal innovation if you want to or have to, you can get scrap smelting, and scrap smelting is where you build the Blacksmith. I thoroughly recommend that you do this special innovate to get scrap smelting. You may feel this is a high cost. It's not. For the portion of the game that you should be in once you're unlocking scrap smelting, this is not expensive. Now, if you happen to draw a bunch of innovations that are not very interesting to you and scrap smelting is one of the options, I think it's okay to take it as a normal innovation, but I think it is better to pay the extra premium and get that bonus innovation here. It's a lot of value, especially as you're turning stuff that hopefully is just kind of worthless, like bones and organs that are generic and have no benefit to you anymore, or they're from monsters that you've crafted all the gear you want. So yeah. Scrap smelting itself provides us one way of actually getting iron as well, which is we can turn broken lanterns or other kinds of scrap into iron directly through this conversion process here. I talk about that in the innovation video, so we're not going to go dive into the detail here. The main thing I want to talk about is iron itself, which is an expensive resource. Leather is like not an expensive resource. You know, you pay a little bit more than one hide to get a leather. It's just an endeavour and do a bunch of hide. Iron, on the other hand, has a very slow conversion rate. It's difficult to get this result, which gives you like convert any number of times, which you get with leather. And instead, most of the time, you're slowly taking an endeavour and 3 scrap to make an iron, or you're getting it via mineral gathering, which requires pickaxes, and pickaxes can break. So iron is an expensive resource. It is also very rarely a drop from monsters. The Phoenix in the core game has an iron skull, so that's one spot, but a lot of the time it's hard to find, and either you need to get it through mineral gathering or sometimes via seeing the terrain pieces, the all-terrain pieces. Okay, so the thesis of the blacksmith is taking this iron and combining it with other things, quite often leather, but also generic resources of various types, in order to craft powerful gear. Lantern armor is a very strong club-orientated set that has some strong abilities and some not overwhelming but downsides you should pay attention to. The weapons, on the other hand, they're all the finest representations of their particular category type, apart from this, for the given class weapon classes. And we are going to talk about this thing, the Perfect Slayer, as well. It's a very rare weapon to be able to craft, but you can get there, and the blacksmith is where you're going to be doing it. Okay, so let's take a dive into all the gear. We'll start with the armor and then work through all of the rest. Okay, Lantern Helm. It's your headpiece, but before we get any further, let's talk about the keywords. So we've done that for everything. And the arm points. So Lantern Helm, classic armor and set, just standard. We know it's an armor, we know it has a set bonus. It's metal, which is a keyword that has both positive and negative interactions. It's heavy, that is a keyword with some negativity to it, some negative interactions, and a smaller amount of positive ones. The main thing to pay attention to when it comes to heavy is survival of the fittest will help you get around the worst downside of heavy. Otherwise, it's just a keyword you live with, okay? Sometimes heavy is a problem, and sometimes heavy is a problem on the hunt, and maybe a whip will help you out. Sometimes it's a problem when you get back to the settlement and you need a lifetime reroll to help you out. Just be aware. The armor set also has 5 armor points per basic location, as a basic level, I should say. This does scale up, but the extra armor points are not on the set bonus. They're on one of the gear cards. So there is a particular way that you'll need to put lantern armor together on your gear grid in order to properly benefit from it. As for the lantern helm itself, like most helms in the core game, it has a down facing blue. If connected, you get a reference to Monster Hunter World or Monster Hunter as a whole earplugs. It makes you deaf. Deaf is both a positive and a negative. Many intimidates require you to be able to hear the intimidate. And if you can't, hey, you don't care. You know, why is everyone else worried? It's just making some, it's opening its mouth and nothing's coming out. But you can't be encouraged, and there are events on the hunt that can negatively impact you, or even a few that may positively impact you if you're deaf. Additionally, you're getting -1 accuracy. That's one of the reasons why this set tends to be a club-orientated set. If you're not running club, you may not activate this earplugs ability and find an additional downward-facing blue to get the important puzzle connection on the body piece sorted. Lantern Gauntlets. This is the first of our club synergy pieces. Very basic. Has a left-facing green if it's connected and puzzled up. +2 accuracy with club weapons. That'll be +1 accuracy total if you have the Lantern Helm activated, or you can just be +2. It's up to you. Then we have the Lantern Curiass. This is the very much the centerpiece of Lantern armor. This is what I was referencing when I was talking about the extra armor points. This is what does it. I need, as I keep forgetting in these videos, to briefly talk about the crafting cost, and then we'll get back to the Curiass. So the Lantern Helm costs 1 iron and 7 bone, which actually I think is quite cheap, because bone, you should have a lot of bone kicking around by the time you hit the Lantern Helm. The Gauntlets, however, 2 iron and 6 leather. This is expensive. This is very expensive. The Curiass is 2 iron and 5 leather, so staggeringly somehow it's cheaper than the Gauntlets. Okay, there we are. That mistake fixed. I'm not going to re-record that, so let's get on. Lantern Curiass, if you connect everything, gives you 3 armor points to all hit locations with metal armor. That's important to note. It'll work on any metal armor, so you can use the Lantern Curiass as long as you activate the puzzle as a centerpiece for a mixed armor set with a bunch of different metal pieces on it. Phoenix armor has metal, dragon armor has metal. That's something to bear in mind and keep an eye out for. It's really great. It's super cool. This armor set also, this Curiass also has the negative of -2 movement. That's a big drop. Losing 1 movement and going from 5 to 4 is manageable. Going from 5 to 3 that's really tough. You will struggle to stay relevant. So you need ways of boosting your movement. We do have an inbuilt way of boosting our movement in this armor set. But if you're doing a mixed set, you might be looking at Phoenix or Dragon boots to help with the movement issues. Next up we have the Lantern Mail. This costs 1 iron and 5 organ, so it's the second cheapest of all of the things to craft. It doesn't do anything except give you protection. It crops up in a hybrid armor set in one of the expansions, but really this is basic. So let's just get on to the Lantern Greaves, where we have a bit more to talk about. Lantern Greaves are how you compensate for this lost movement. You need to connect all 3 of these. You can connect this by putting it below the Lantern Curiass, so that's slot 5, that's slot 8. That's nice and neat, but these reds do require a bit more work. Now there are a bunch of different options that you can go through. Lantern Sword, as you can see, is just saying, hey, I could be it. Lantern Dagger, the same. You can have the Monster Tooth Necklace on this side. You can have the Bone Club on either side. You can have the Scrap Shield over here. There's a lot of options. We'll look at a few when we look at the layout and the armor set itself as a whole. Lantern Greaves cost 1 iron and 5 leather, which makes them more on the cheaper side, but not as cheap as the Helm and the Mail. They are the second or third best gear card in the Lantern set. They do crop up in another armor set, a hybrid armor set, if I remember correctly. I'm doing this entirely off memory. We'll talk about those hybrid armor sets when we get to them in the future. Now, at this point, let's drop out of the deck for a moment, and we will go and take a look at the set bonus and the typical layout for the armor, which is just up here. So, set bonus card first, we'll zoom in. You feel invincible. On arrival, gain survival up to the survival limit. Amazing. It means you get to spend your survival going through the hunt phase, and you don't have to worry because you'll get a full amount once you get to the showdown and the arrival trigger happens. And then this one, the extra weight is great leverage. All clubs in your gear grid gain sharp. This is why Lantern Armor is considered to be a club set. This is why the Bone Club is considered to be a late game weapon. This also works really well with the Whistling Mace, the Skullcap Hammer, the Riot Mace from the Gorm. Anything with a club keyword, you should always pay close attention to, because Lantern Armor is out there to make it have a renaissance once you get to the late game or end game. This is the typical layout. So as we can see, earplugs active, accuracy active, extra armor active, just the Lantern Greaves are not active. We'll look at a few options for those when we come back to the build. But I wanted to show that this is really restrictive, and about the only thing you'll see happen at times is that the Lantern Helm will get moved to one of the side slots, and something else will get put in that slot to not deal with earplugs being active. That's very much situational. So before we get to builds though, we need to look at the rest of the gear, and we'll start with the Lantern Sword. So this is where we talk about the keywords, abilities and keywords. Most of these have finesse and metal. There's a few that some variations in that, and obviously there's our weapon keyword here. So swords are perfectly fine. Weapon type perfectly fine. Proficiency, specialism, mastery, they're all They're all fine, which makes this a average late game weapon. I don't think it's a bad weapon. I don't think it's an amazing weapon. It has sharp, which adds an extra 1d10 strength to each wound attempt, which means you're effectively rolling 2d10 for your wound attempt. You will need to make sure the dice are different colours, so you don't get mixed up with which one was the wounding roll and which one is the sharp roll, because the sharp roll can roll a 1 and it doesn't fail your attack, but the wound roll can roll a 1 and it will. What that means is you roughly want to estimate that a sharp weapon will add about 11 onto the wound attempt. So you can think of the lantern sword as on average reaching to about a 14. Obviously, that is not strictly true because we have this auto wound and the auto fail on the D10, but it's for general purposes, for wargame purposes, for just speed and ease of thinking, you can look at a monster and go, okay, if it's got 14 toughness, I should be wounded about half the time without any help from anything else, like Monster Tooth Necklace or my Survivor's Strength or anything like that, and you can adjust accordingly. This is why these weapons are more impressive than their profile looks. However, many of them in this have early iron. So early iron is when an attack result is a 1, you cancel any hits and end the attack. That's a really bad downside, and for a long time people were very shy about early iron weapons for good reason, because it was really galling to roll your dice and just have a complete whiff. The more dice you roll as well, like the Lantern Sword is a 3-speed weapon, the increased chances of a complete miss, because it's a 1 on any of those dice. It's not just one of the dice, it's any of them. So a 10% chance each time on 3 dice, that's pretty bad, and it'll cancel everything that's going on. Now, we will get to a mitigation form that does exist, but I will briefly note that the Dung Beetle Knight armour has a way of mitigating early iron built into it, which is pretty cool. As it comes directly to the Lantern Sword though, this is an okay weapon profile. Slightly above average speed, above average accuracy, strength is bolstered by sharp, so it's better than it looks. Really, it's about 8 to 9 strength is what this weapon actually is on average. So it's a solid weapon, definitely one of the contenders for the late game. You'll see sword and board builds that are Lantern Sword, Blood Paint, and Beacon Shield quite often. That's one way of doing everything. That's very fun, powerful. But yeah, I think this is perfectly fine. Its crafting cost is also not too bad. It's 1 iron, 5 bone, and 3 hide. And as mentioned before, at this portion of the campaign, those kind of costs shouldn't be a major deal for you, because the monsters you're fighting should be popping out a lot of resources. Alright, now we have the Lantern Dagger. So this dagger costs 1 iron, 4 leather, and 2 bone. Actually makes it more expensive than the Lantern Sword in my opinion. On the keyword front, it has finesse and metal, both of which, they're good. Finesse does have a positive interaction we're going to look at later. And the dagger type, I really like daggers. I don't like daggers with this attack profile. So this is a paired weapon. You can dual wield lantern daggers, so you can have them at 4 speed and 7+ to hit, which is fine. But this strength here, that's a real problem, this weapon strength. Because again, if we look at this now and we go, okay, about a 14-ish wounding, about a 14. This is wounding about a 12. That's quite a difference. And when you're trying to stretch and reach monsters with 15, 16, 17, 18, or even 19 toughness, it's really hard to overcome that without a really big, buff, powerful dagger user. Which is why I recommend, if you get a strong survivor who's got multiple strength bonuses, that's when you start considering them to be a dagger user, because they do need that extra power behind them to make daggers do the job. The other problem is low strength is not super great when combined with dagger mastery, because you just go straight to a wounding roll, so you don't even care about this bit, you just care about this. So this dagger is just a bit behind where it needs to be. It still is the best dagger in the core game though, so You know, if you're just core game only and you're using daggers, this is what you're making, and it could be worse in those states. I do think this is worth wielding paired, because this attack profile is great for going up to full speed, but you probably want to be wearing very tough armor when you do that. You might even go as far as wearing lantern armor to dual wield lantern daggers. So ultimately expensive and not powerful enough, so outside of certain circumstances, you won't use lantern daggers too often. Next up we have the lantern glaive, and oh my goodness, this is an all-star. This is a weapon that just keeps giving and giving. It is a melee spear axe with two-handed finesse and metal. So two-handed, obviously a negative if you lose an arm, a hand due to dismembered limb. You can't wield this, but oh boy, a spear axe together in one thing, oh, that is good. What it means is you get to use an axe and get the benefit of spear specialization. Amazing. Or you can even have a spear, master with the axe specialization. This weapon keeps on giving and giving. It is fantastic. It has reach 2, which is amazing as well. Reach, as I've talked about in the past, is great with any kind of monster movement ability. So white line armor, although white line armor, you probably will be past white line armor by the time you get lantern glaive. Phoenix armor, dragon armor, they all love this because the extra reach improves the threat range that you can manage to attack with while using your monster movement ability to gain all of its bonuses. Lantern glaive is just really good. It has also a solid attack profile. 4 strength plus sharp, yes please. 15. We're at 15. 15 is an important number for fighting level 3 monsters, and that's 15 without anything else extra. I love the lantern glaive. I think it is standout, probably the best weapon in the blacksmith, with an asterisk because there is a better quote-unquote weapon that we'll get to, but it's certainly top 3 at a minimum. My personal favourite, my number 1. It costs 2 iron, 2 leather and 4 bone, so it is expensive. It is worth the price. Now we have our grand weapon, the Dragon Slayer. It's another two-handed weapon. You'll notice it does not have finesse because it's a huge hulking lump of iron. This is one of 2 references to Guts' weapon from Berserk. The Dragon Slayer has early iron, but this is irrelevant when you're 1 speed and slow unless you get frenzied. So it's not really a downside here. The big downside is we have frail. Frail, as we've talked about in the past, is pretty scary. Here, this thing requires 5 iron and 3 organ, as well as you have to have paint in your settlement before you can make it. You do not want to be breaking this, and this is one of the weapons where I would consider putting a scrap rebar next to it, because of that's actually a valuable use of the scrap rebar, and the Dragon Slayer isn't hurt by not getting to activate this red affinity here. Although, of course, you can instead choose to go the route of using hit location control and scouting, such as the Cat Eye Circlet and the Wisdom Potion. Or you can just use it against White Lions, because they don't have any super dense locations. Either way. So, frail is the actual negative to this weapon. In compensation for that, you get Devastating 1, which means this thing always deals 2 wounds when you swing, and you get a really good attack profile. So, 1 speed, slow, pretty normal standard. 6+ accuracy, fine for a grand weapon. I prefer 5+, but, it is a really unwieldy weapon just aesthetically, so I think it makes sense. It has a base 9 strength plus sharp. So, if we take our average roll for wound plus a sharp dice, our wounding roll, and add that to this 9, we've got 20 as our average wounding roll. Fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And it's got decent affinities. It's got affinities that the lantern armor even appreciates. This is an all-star. So yeah, I really like this. Obviously, when later in the campaign, near the end, Grand Weapon falls off a little bit because Indomitable does affect its knockdown power, but specialization still gives this +1 accuracy here, and it's great in the hands of a Grandmaster, but it's amazing in the hands of somebody who doesn't even have any ranks in it, in specialization, in proficiency, so it's amazing. The Scrap Shield, however, this one, right, well, it's not great. Let's talk about its upsides first. It's 3 bone, 2 scrap and 3 leather, so it's super cheap to make. It also puts 1 armor point to all hit locations, so not bad for a shield, and it will work with shield proficiency for an extra 1. It does give you block 1, and it actually has one of the better attacking profiles for a shield, so it isn't all doom and gloom. On top of that, this thing has the bone keyword, which makes it useful for bone synergies, and that is something to always keep an eye out for. And finally, it's got this lovely affinity here, which means it can be used to activate the Lantern Greaves, while also providing some extra armor points to get you to like 9 armor points in all locations, maybe more if you're also running a second shield. So I'm not super high on the Scrap Shield, but I do think there is a place for it in the game. It is just situational. It's phenomenal in the Tortoise build, or the Turtle build, which is just as many different shields as possible, and that gives you so many armor points that you don't need to run an armor set, which will free up slots on the gear grid. So it has a good point in that it's not too expensive, and it does have a desirable affinity, and it does stack with other shields, so it has a place in this game. I used to be super down on the Scrap Shield, but time has mellowed me out a bit on that, and I have had experiences where crafting it has been useful and positive, mostly because of this affinity. Still, how about we look at what a real shield is? How about we look at probably the best weapon and probably the best gear card in the entire Blacksmith? Say hello to the Beacon Shield, or as it's also known at times, the Bacon Shield. This piece of gear is not cheap. It is 2 iron, 3 leather, and 4 bone. But what you get is the best shield in the core game. It has the metal and heavy keywords, so all of the usual notes on those. It also has the shield type, which, as we've talked about before, shield is a very good weapon type. And so it's adding 2 to all hit locations, rising up to 3 if you have shield specialization, either shield mastery in the settlement or shield specialization on a particular survivor. It's also got a 1, 6+5 attacking profile, meaning if you rush making beacon shields, which is a definite valid strategy, you can level this up fairly quickly. Biggest thing though, block 2. Block 2 is such a phenomenal number. That is effectively removing 2 speed from the monster, and that helps you scale up against the higher speed that many more powerful monsters have incredibly well. This is a staple card. This is a just incredible piece of gear. This is the first, second, and often third thing I will craft on the Blacksmith. I want beacon shields ahead of weapons because I can get powerful weapons from monsters here and there, and I can bolster them up with strength. I cannot get this many armor points and block 2 from any other source. This is 10 armor points. That is a whole set of rawhide with bonus in a single gear card. It cannot be understated how powerful this is, and you could craft 4 of these and I wouldn't criticize you at all for them. It is really good. Okay, From the best weapon to my pet weapon, it's another whip. As I'm sure many of you who've listened to these know by now, Fen loves whips. Fen loves whips, Fen loves thrown weapons. The ring whip is the best whip in the game, still. Asterisk, I'm not going to explain. But if you know why, you know why I've asterisked that. This isn't a super impressive weapon, but it does have reach 2, which I am surprised more whips do not have. This is your destination for most campaigns if you're going to be using whips. You're literally going to go rawhide whip, then maybe either a silk whip or a hunter's whip, and then you're going to finish with a ring whip. I don't really know what more to say about it, except it has a decent attack profile with 2 5+, but it has terrible strength. Its strength is effectively 5.5 for the sharp dice, or 6, 5 to 6, if you prefer to think by that. This weapon struggles to wound monsters, but it can be helped by the mastery, because the mastery for whips is +5 strength, and I think that's what this weapon was designed around. So if you're going to use whips, you want to find a strong survivor and you want to gradually progress them up and get their mastery, and then stick them in the settlement and let them cool their heals until it is time to give them a ring whip. And then they can go to town with a fairly good weapon, because they'll have +5 strength from the mastery and plus whatever their own strength is, say +2. So that 7 strength is far more impressive. But yeah, it's this could have been better. However, you know, it's fine. It's not too expensive. It costs an iron, 3 organs, and 3 bones, which is pretty cheap. And that asterisk is doing a lot of heavy work as well. So, ring whip, yeah, you know, I love it. But it's not the best weapon in here. It's not even close. Right. Now we get to the addition that was added to help with early iron. So this wasn't in the original version of the Blacksmith. It was added in during an update. It is a lantern, which does have some relevance. Lantern is a relevant keyword depending on the campaign you're playing. It has a left-red affinity, which, as we mentioned before, is good for lantern armor. It lets you ignore early iron, so that is its biggest use, is ignoring early iron. So this is what you're going to put on just about every survivor who you're using an early iron weapon with, except for maybe the Dragon Slayer. The other thing it has is a very neat and unusual ability. You can spend an activation and give you or an adjacent survivor's finesse weapon +4 strength for its next attack. So this allows you to, if you have the lantern and you have the weapon, it allows you to spend a survival to surge and polish, and then spend your normal to attack. Or you can polish in one round and then you can attack in the following round. So it lets you take more actions for a higher quality of attack, and that can help stuff like the ring whip and the lantern dagger and even the lantern sword get to a level that might not be possible elsewhere. There is also another way you can use this, which is effectively having a squire. So you have a survivor who is performing a support role, maybe they've got a shield, and they have a polishing lantern, and they will polish the edges of adjacent survivor or survivors instead of attacking themselves. This playstyle is getting more and more support. It's not super great in the core game, but it is a really neat extra function, and it's something to remember. Now, the kind of issue with this is it's a whole extra iron and an organ and a scrap. That is that's expensive for a lantern, the iron in particular, but it's cheaper than the weapon crafter lantern. Let's just move this. Excuse me, and can I pick this up, please? There we go. because the scrap lantern actually requires a perfect organ, which I think a perfect organ is kind of more value than an iron, because of how hard it is to get perfect organs at times. But, you know, that's another lantern, and it's kind of loose. Now I'm talking it out, I'm like, actually the cost isn't too bad for the portion in the campaign. But, you know, it is what it is. Now, we've got one more thing to look at before we take a little quick examination of the meta, quote-unquote, build for Blacksmith, for Lantern Armor from Blacksmith, and that is the Perfect Slayer. So the Perfect Slayer it's a journey to get it. So you're not able to unlock it at first. You need this Perfect Crucible, which I have pictured here. It's been sat there the whole time. Let's zoom in for a moment just so we can admire. Like, I really love the artwork on this and the way it's showing like the actual design of the Perfect Slayer right in there already. But you can't just get the Perfect Crucible, you won't get it from a showdown. You have to get it via the hunt. It's locked behind a portcullis event, but you can't go through the portcullis without having a key to unlock it. In the core game, there's only one way to get that key. You have to enjoy the Warhammer Quest reference. So, what I mean by that is in 1995, Games Workshop released Warhammer Quest. This is a 1 to 4 player cooperative, very challenging dungeon crawler with a pretty high fatality rate, and its fingerprints are deeply embedded into Kingdom Death. There's a bunch of areas where Warhammer Quest influenced and inspired mechanics, and I think that's super cool. I love how games iterate and build on other mechanics. The portcullis is unlocked via the Dying Prospector, which is a reference to the Dying Dwarf Prospector. And the Dying Dwarf Prospector hands you a key. So when you run into a portcullis later, you can unlock the portcullis. And that's exactly what we have here in Kingdom Death. So you need to have the Prospector first, and they'll give you the key, and then you record the key in your settlement. And then, when you encounter the portcullis, you can unlock the portcullis and you can get the Perfect Crucible, which is a piece of iron, and boom. You get, you know, you're going to hold on to this until it's time to craft. So, before we look at the weapon, let's just take a brief look at the crafting cost, which is 9 iron and 3 organs, and the Perfect Crucible, so 10 iron. Really expensive, but on top of that you're going to suffer minus 1d10 population. So here's the thing you want to think about with this. Every survivor who you would lose from this population roll, if they have a lifetime reroll, you want to think about whether you want to spend that lifetime reroll to try and roll a lower number. So I typically, if I'm going to craft this, I will look to get nearer 30 population if I can, because I don't want to get really crushed by a high roll that suddenly requires me to sacrifice important survivors. And if I'm playing with Survival of the Fittest, I'll make sure I've got a fair stock of just plebs. Plebs is the term I use for plebeians, for survivors who just kick around in the settlement. They don't go hunting, they don't fight nemesis monsters, they don't have anything interesting or unusual about them. They might become hunters later down the line, but for the moment they're just kind of tabula rasas. And then there's also the badly injured survivors who sometimes you go out and hunt and that survivor immediately gets crippled in some way. You don't care about it, so that they're a potential sacrifice as well. This is one of the places to dump them in. So essentially I'm saying don't be afraid to spend rerolls on this if you roll high, but probably accept it if you get 5 or less. That's like a reasonable amount of population to lose. And think about what happens if I keep rolling a 10. Can I withstand that? So ensure you have the population. As for why would you spend all that population? Those people who've played with this weapon know fully. But let's take a look at it. This is the Perfect Slayer. It is a weapon melee, grand weapon, two-handed sword, heavy finesse, and metal weapon. So it's a sword, and it is a grand weapon, meaning it can benefit from both specializations at the same time, And you can, a sword master can wield it and get benefits, or a grand weapon master can wield it and get benefits. It's also finesse for the polishing lantern. It does not have early iron. It does have slow, because it's a grand weapon. And it has sharp, so everything I've talked about with sharp previously applies here. It has devastating 2, which means each time it wounds, it deals 3 damage. It is also irreplaceable, so if the survivor wielding the Perfect Slayer dies, you lose the Perfect Slayer, and you need to find another key and another portcullis and another Perfect Crucible in order to manufacture this weapon again. So, look after it. Look after the survivor using it. It also has -2 movement, so you're going to want to use this on survivors who get plus movement. Interestingly, putting it on a survivor with lantern armor is not great, because you're down to 3 movement again, and that can be a problem. You have to kind of dash everywhere. It's really good on a Phoenix survivor, because if you're insane, Phoenix armor gives you more movement. Dragon armor, likewise, it's really good on dragon armor. But the biggest part of this is that stat profile. So this is 3 speed, which is only relevant if you get to ignore slow, i.e. via frenzying. That's one of the reasons why the frenzy drink is not a bad card, it's a situational card. Sometimes frenzy is very good. It has 6+ accuracy, perfectly fine. It has 14 strength with sharp. So your average wounding roll with this is 25. It is incredible, and it's dealing 3 wounds per successful wound roll. This thing will shred monsters. There is nothing that compares to it in the core game. It is amazing. It should be, because it is a heck of a journey to get. But essentially, if you get the key and you get the Perfect Crucible, aim to craft this, because it is worth everything you pay for it. It's amazing. It is the Guts reference. It is a fantastic giant hunk of iron to swing around and destroy things, and it is a lot of fun for a survivor to be frenzied while using this as well. And you can have some incredible frenzy builds in this game, so boom. Perfect Slayer, perfect final thing to look at in the Blacksmith. A phenomenal weapon. Now, before we go, let's take a look at the armor set and consider some builds. So, let's flip these up and see what we have here. So this is one layout you can go with. This version is using the Bone Club here for this affinity, and also to give you a 4 accuracy, sharp, high strength Bone Club, and you get an extra strength here. It's quite basic, and the nice thing about this is you've probably crafted the Monster Tooth Necklace and the Bone Club earlier on during the campaign, so it doesn't cost anything to use them, because you're just putting them on a survivor who can make good use of them. The Skullcap Hammer is one of my alternate options. I sometimes like to use this layout and have 2 clubs if I need to move around a bit, but it's not essential. Whoa! Wow. Sorry about that. Alternatively, you can have the Whistling Mace. Again, this gets very good. Unwieldy is less of an issue when you've got this many armor points. So, absolutely fantastic, especially for controlling the AI. This one, -1 speed, is solid. Dazed is decent, especially when combined with beacon shields for extra block. But Whistling Mace is also a lot of fun. Another option we can have here is, as I mentioned before, you can run the Scraps shield in this slot, and you can run any left-facing red weapon here, like the Lantern Armor or whatever you fancy, depending on how you're going to do it. This is just typically how I'll handle things. I don't usually run Monster Grease, but you could put Monster Grease in here instead if you're running a single weapon. And as mentioned before, the Lantern Helm, optionally you can move it to one side. I didn't mean to zoom in there, I just did. Having a lot of failures between mouse and chair here today. See, and you'll put something else in here to get the Lantern Curiass active, but it's restrictive, but it's powerful. You're dealing with all these side slots here, and that's it. So, Lantern armor is great. Let's summarize things. Lantern armor is a premium late and end game armor set. I will typically craft 1, maybe 2 sets of it at most, and the first set will always be focused around being a club tank. In the weapon front, Beacon Shield is by far and away the standout of all of these, although Perfect Slayer is simply the best, better than all the rest. The Dragon Slayer, Lantern Glaive, and Lantern Sword are all fine crafts, like they are good. The Lantern Dagger is decent if you're running daggers, but the usual concerns with daggers being low in strength does apply. Polishing Lantern will help cancel early iron and also help boost the strength on things which might be slightly lacking, such as the Lantern Dagger or Lantern Sword. The Ring Whip is your de facto end game whip, late game end game whip, because we don't have a lot of options still in the Generation 1 gear. And the Scrap Shield is better than it looks, because of that affinity, because of that cheap crafting cost, and because of the fact that it can be stacked alongside Beacon Shields to be even more tougher and durable. Okay, so thank you very much for listening, and next time you head out clad in head to toe in metal, happy hunting.